All right. Well, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn for the PUC Task Force. It's June 16th of 2025, and I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Jeanette Sutton from the Warren Room to talk to us today about evidence-based alert and warnings. As we all know, alert and warnings is a very highly discussed subject in Colorado right now, and I'm super excited to bring Dr. Sutton with us to talk about this and to give you some tools and resources to use at your PSAPs as we head into the summer. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Sutton. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen. And you should see not my presenter view screen, but my regular view screen.
Yep, that's what we see.
Oh, okay, good. So Jennifer and I connected, gosh, I think it was maybe around this time last year, maybe in the fall, when I had met one of your colleagues at an evacuation wildfire roundtable that was hosted by the U.S. Fire Administrator. And Steve, you may have been part of that. I can't remember, but sitting next to Dwight, and he said, "Oh, wow, you know who would really you could connect with and would be really interested in what you're working on is Jennifer Kirkland." Because we were talking a little bit about emergency alerts and warnings that are issued through 911 call centers and the variation on the ways that those messages are written and the way that they look when they show up as a wireless emergency alert. Because I was starting to find some in my research that didn't prove to conform to what we know is the most effective message contents and message structure for wireless emergency alerts. So Jennifer and I spent some time talking together, and we wrote an article that we hope will be published in the National Emergency Numbers Association Journal or magazine. And she's continuing to press on that. But just a little bit about my background. The work that I'm presenting today comes from my work as an associate professor at the University of Albany, where I work in the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. And this work was funded by FEMA, the IPAWS program, Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. And they hired my team to do research on wireless emergency alerts, but to also create for them something called the Message Design Dashboard, which helps alerting authorities to write messages that are complete and consistent. And I'm going to give you the link to that at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've seen in emergency alerts and warnings in Colorado, nationwide, talk to you a little bit about a scenario that I envision that 911 dispatchers might engage in when they're faced with writing an alert and warning, and then walk you through some of the practices that we've seen and how they can be improved as we think about writing messages from those call centers. So we've taken a deep dive into alerts and warnings that have been issued through WIA. And when we pull out the messages for Colorado, we see for this 10-year period from 2012 to 2022, almost 350 messages were issued during that 10-year period. This includes 90 characters and 360 characters. And when we look at what those messages are about, we see quite a few messages that were issued for public health, which would have been during the COVID, when COVID was really active, 2020, 2021-ish. That's followed by missing persons alerts, wildfire, public safety, like chemical spills or power outages, kinds of things that would fall under public safety. Law enforcement incidents, which are they're traditionally labeled a law enforcement incident, but it might be an active shooter or a suspect, something like that. Technological hazard, atmospheric hazard, which falls into the things that the National Weather Service frequently issues for, and then others that we couldn't tell what they were about because there wasn't enough information in the message to determine it. When we look at the content of the messages, we see that the amount of content in messages varies by the number of characters that a message includes. In 2019, messages expanded from 90 characters to 360 characters. So in 2019, we were able to start to look at how those messages, the contents have improved dramatically. Where most frequently we see contents about the location of impact or the location that the hazard is affecting. That's followed by a combination of the hazard name and guidance about what people should do to protect themselves. That would then variation on inclusion of the source and the timing or the time of the message itself. So you can see that there's not complete for any of these categories. They're never 100% in all of the messages, but the location information, the guidance information, both really important, and the hazard information, those are certainly up there. When we compare those with the rest of the US, we just pulled that out of the larger body of WIAs that we were analyzing. And so that's a subset of the 6,547 that we looked at. You could see that the 360 character messages perform much better than 90 character messages. And these, when we analyze these, it does not include missing and endangered persons or Amber Alerts, nor does it include National Weather Service messages. So it's just messages coming from alerting authorities. But overall, only 8.5% of those messages sent in the past decade would be considered complete. So they would contain the source, the name of the hazard, the location of impact, or some location information, a timing element, and then something about what people should do to protect themselves. And this is it for the nationwide sample. So when we think about what a complete WIA should look like, when it includes all of those 5 hazard contents, we see that this message that's here on the screen is a far cry from what we would think that a WIA should look like. But this is an example of the kind of messages that we did find in our broader data set. This is obviously not from Colorado because in this case, Nampa, Idaho is included, and the Idaho appears to be part of the license plate number. And this is part of the question that comes up as we're going to look at some more messages that are like this. It's really hard to determine what exactly this message is trying to tell us because it's filled with jargon and information that's really difficult to sort through. When we look at the other messages in a few minutes, you're going to have an opportunity to try and interpret them for yourselves and see if you agree with my interpretation or not. But when you see a message like this and think about who it's going to on their cell phones, and they have to figure out what does this mean, it raises a lot of questions about how effective they are. So as Jennifer and I were talking about, well, what is actually happening for a 911 call center operator when they're asked to send a WIA? Because we know that they are. And this is what we think happens in real life. What I think happens in real life is that you're sitting in a call center, you have all these screens that are open in front of you, you're monitoring all kinds of information. Things are coming in from the field, things are coming in from people calling in, and you're tasked with managing and monitoring all this information and keeping things straight in your head. And then from the field, you get a call. This example was used when I came out and spoke to the radio conference a few months ago, but this could just as well have been what happened in Minnesota this weekend, where an armed suspect is on the loose and you have to send out a message immediately for people to shelter in place. And you're not given a lot of information, but you know that you have to send something very, very quickly. And so you tune in to your alerting software. The alerting software has multiple steps. It's one of many software systems that you're required to utilize. The first thing it asks is for you to identify the location, determine from a list of potential message types if it's what kind of message it falls under. In this case, you might select that it's a civil emergency message. You could have selected that it was a civil danger warning, um, or a shelter in place warning. It's up to you based upon your policies. And then you're asked to identify whether or not it's public safety threat or an imminent threat message. For missing persons, you would have to identify another kind of a category. Um, Following that, you determine the urgency and the severity and the certainty and the expiration time. And then you get to this box. And this is where everything stops, because every alerting software, except for one that I've now seen, when you get to this place, the box is empty. And you're faced with the question of, what do I write for a 90-character message? What do I write for a 360-character message? If I get to that point where I'm going to write it in Spanish, do I have some system that translates it automatically for me? Do I have somebody in the office who can help to write the message in 90 characters? And when you're under this incredible stress and you have to figure out what to put in the box, sometimes you revert to the language that you know, which in many cases might be something like CAD language or other law enforcement kind of legal terms. But that is the big question that we were addressing with our work with FEMA, is what goes into the box? How can we help to improve the messages that go into that box so that people can take action? So we started, when we designed these messages, by looking at, what does the theory on alerts and warnings say influences protective action behavior, so that we can design messages that are best suited to influence people to respond correctly. And this is from Dr. Dennis Maletti and John Sorensen in their work in 1990, and has been applied to alerts and warnings since then. But initially, a person has to receive the message through some channel. In this case, we're talking about wireless emergency alerts, which means their alerts have to be turned on. And to get a very narrow alert, it has to be turned on. Their geographical location needs to be turned on also, but they have to receive that message and hear it and be able to start to interact with that information. And then that message alone needs to help to shift them from a perception of being safe to a perception of being at risk. Or in the case of a missing persons type of a message, it needs to shift them from a perception of, I don't need to pay attention, to, this is something important. I need to think about this. I need to understand it, and I need to act on it. And then to take some sort of a behavioral response. So when we think about people actually receiving that message, it's not just a matter of it showing up on their phone, but they actually engage in a series of perceptions in response to that message. They have to understand the content and what the message is about. So that goes to that very first piece of information that we looked at right before this, which was, can I even make sense of what that message is trying to say, with the acronyms and the lack of clarity around what it's trying to communicate about the suspect or the victim or the license plate, the location. So understanding is the first priority. And then we have to believe that it's real and that it's affecting us or someone we care about, and that it's coming from a trusted source, which is a challenge when you're receiving a lot of things on your phones these days where you don't know where it's coming from. We have to personalize that information, and in terms of thinking that it's going to affect us personally, requiring us to do something in response to the message that we receive. And then we have to make a decision about what to do based upon the contents of that message. And if we can't understand the message, or we don't believe that it's a true threat, or it doesn't actually affect us, then the decision can be to just eliminate the message and go on with our day. But if we understand it and believe that we need to respond, then we're going to make a decision to act. If the information in the message is meaningful and helps people to make a decision about what to do, then it can lead to that protective action behavioral response. So those are the individual processes that we go through in our own minds, but messages are really, it's a social process, because it's not very likely that we'll immediately act on something without checking in with the environment around us or with other information sources, even if it's just to yell down the hall, hey, did you get that message? And are you gonna are you going to evacuate or are you going to shelter in place? And we call that in the social sciences, Dr. Mulledy called it milling, which is basically it's confirmation of safety, confirmation of risk, and making a determination about what we're going to do. So these things happen kind of cyclically. It's not a linear process. They're all happening at the same time, where the milling activity is engaging with our message perceptions as we're making a decision about what to do. But really important, when you think about that message, the words that you choose and to put into a message is one of the very few factors that you can affect in the warning response process. Because everyone comes in with their social context, with their pre-existing beliefs, with their prior experience in response to the threat or in response to receiving messages, their capabilities and their access to resources are all things within their environment. And the message that they receive directly from the person who's issuing that message is one of the few things that you have control of in this entire process. And so those message contents become really important. And the contents that we utilize to motivate action fall basically into about 5 categories. The first thing is using a local, familiar, trusted source and actually naming that source. When it's a 360 character message, you can actually spell out the whole name. If it's a really familiar acronym, you might be able to use that. But in general, it's telling people the specific name of the source, and that goes first. That's followed by something about the hazard, the name of the hazard, and the consequences or the impacts of that hazard. I know that I frequently will see messages that will just say, evacuate now, without actually saying what the hazard is that people are going to be responding to. And it's really important that people are also told what the hazard is that they're being asked to evacuate for. But the hazard is the second thing that needs to be included in the message. The third is telling people where the hazard is located or which populations are going to be affected by that hazard. And using familiar landmarks and known physical boundaries are really important. And spelling that out. Again, that really helps with personalization of information. The fourth is something about what actions need to be taken to protect yourself, either health-wise or safety in terms of protecting your breathing if it's something you're being exposed to, or safety in terms of sheltering in place or leaving, explaining what those are, and then an element of time of when the event is happening and when people should take action. And those 5 contents should fit into a 90 character message and a 360 character message. About 95% of phones now can receive the 360 character message. And so we always advocate that you write for the longer message and then condense it down to the 90 characters because the more information that people have in a message, the less likely they are to spend a lot of time looking to answer these questions that are on the screen in front of you. And then in terms of message style, because we want to increase understanding, is we want to use plain language. That means no jargon and no acronyms or abbreviations and using familiar words. It's not about talking down to people or making it so simple because you don't believe people can understand. It's about using language that's easily translated into other words, other languages, and giving people really clear information rather than making people read at a very high reading level. We also can call visual attention to different pieces of a message. You're going to see some messages in here where the entire thing is in capital letters. But when you use all caps selectively to draw attention to individual words in the message, your eyes are drawn there. And we know this because we've put people in front of eye tracking experiments and asked them to read the message, and we can track where their eyes go, and then we can ask them questions about it afterwards, and they very briefly stop on the all caps, but they also remember those things better. And the use of all caps also, especially for time or for the name of the hazard, it increases people's sense of urgency when they read those words. All right, so that's all background. And now we're going to spend some time looking at some messages that have been sent. So these are real messages, and I'm going to apply the things that I just talked about to the message, and then we're going to actually try to interpret them and write them according to what our theory and research says those messages should look like instead. So here's the first one. So if we interpret this, first we notice that it's in all caps. And so the words could very easily run together in somebody's screen on their very small screen. But we think of the source, it looks like per BSO and Sunrise PD are something about the source, if we can read that. I don't know if this is in Colorado. I don't know if Sunrise PD is in BSO. This could be the Boulder County Sheriff. I don't know. Probably not. And then the hazard is LEO activity. If you interpret acronyms, you know that's law enforcement activity. The location is in the area of 4400 North Nob Hill Road, and there is guidance. It says stay in place. There's no time, but this is, again, it's in all caps. There's a lot of acronyms. It's a little bit difficult to read because of the use of acronyms and abbreviations, which could lead to some questions if a person received this message. Also, law enforcement activity isn't very specific. We don't know exactly what's going on. So if we change this to plain language, we see, based upon my interpretation of what the message is trying to say, it's a law enforcement activity in the area of 4400 Nob Hill Road, and that people should stay in place because it's authorized by the Sunrise Police Department. And I think that's a pretty decent interpretation of what the message is saying, but it can be better. We could rewrite this message so that it follows the guidance. And if it did, it would say something like this. It's the B Sheriff's Office. It's a law enforcement activity in all caps. It's occurring in the area of 4400 North Nob Hill Road at a particular time. And it tells people that if you're nearby, stay indoors with locked doors and windows until an all clear is given. And additional protective action information is to call 911 only for emergencies. So this is more in line with the guidance that helps to draw people's eyes to particular pieces of information. It includes all 5 pieces of content, includes the name of the source, the hazard, the location, the time, and guidance. It does change the inclusion of who authorized the message, Sunrise PD. That would be a policy decision about whether or not including that information is important for the organization. But in this case, it's a complete message, and it would help people to understand what's happening, where, when, and what they should do immediately. All right, so that was the first example. Second example is for a missing person. Here, the source is at the end of the message in all caps, I think. MCEMA. I think that's an emergency management agency. In this case, the hazard, and we're treating the missing person as similar to the name of a hazard. It's a missing 13-year-old who's 5'6" tall, 120 pounds, has brown hair, brown eyes, black shirt, black long sleeve shirt. Minecraft. We don't know the location of the event or where this person is missing from or where they might be, but the guidance is to call 911. We don't know if it's call 911 if seen or call 911 if you have information, or call 911 for more information. That's a little unclear. And there's no time, so we don't know when this was issued or when the person was last seen or how long they've been missing. In terms of plain language, there are some acronyms in here, some abbreviations, and it leaves a little some things for question. And visually, it's not terribly hard to read, but those acronyms and abbreviations make it difficult. So if we go on and change this to plain language, my interpretation is that this is a missing 13-year-old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, 120 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, black long sleeve shirt with Minecraft design on the front of it. And they should call 911 MCEMA. But to improve it a little bit further is by following our message writing guidance for missing persons. In this case, we move the source to the front of the message. MC Emergency Management Agency. The hazard or the event of the message is a missing child. This is a 13-year-old. We don't know the race or the sex of the person who's missing. 5 feet 6 inches tall, 120 pounds with brown hair. Goes by first name so that if we need to call out to that person, we have their name, or if we know a person by that particular name, we can might search for them differently. Wearing a black long sleeve t-shirt with Minecraft design. We're adding in location information, last seen at location, and time information on date and time. And then if there's anything else that's important to describe that missing person, we would add it because we still have space in our 360 character message. And in this case, we're telling people that if you see the person, call 911. And because most missing persons messages include some sort of a link, we're telling people to check URL for information. Okay, example number 3. This one is in all caps again. Here, we don't know who the source is. The hazard, again, the description of the person who's missing, it looks like it might be a 17 YOA BM LSJ BJ UNC SHRT CAMO JKT BK. You see, it's all in acronyms and abbreviations. The location, it looks like it's 1103 East Church Street, and there is a time listed, 10 p.m. It's difficult to read because of those abbreviations, and it's also difficult to read because everything's in all caps. So let's change this one. A little bit easier to read, but there's some questions about whether or not we're interpreting things correctly. We think it's a 17-year-old black male named Cameron Lyles. We don't know what LN means. Last seen at 1103 East Church Street at 10 p.m. wearing a long sleeve white, we're not sure what BJ is, what UNK is. Perhaps they're talking about a short camouflage jacket and wearing a backpack, and has long dreadlock hairs. Still making up our own interpretation on this one because it's a little difficult to interpret. But if we follow the message writing guidance, we see some things that turn out a little different. Here we've given the source of the message as the city police department, and we've named the hazard at the front. It's a missing person. This is a 17-year-old black male with long dreadlocks who goes by Cameron. Last seen at 1103 East Church Street in the city at 10 p.m. He was wearing a long sleeve white short camouflage jacket and a backpack. And if seen, call 911. And again, this message has additional space for additional information, and it can be improved even more. I'm not sure that a long sleeve white short camouflage jacket works very well for describing what the person is wearing. Additional details might be provided to help to clarify that. And the city name currently agrees with the name of the police department, but the city name could be lengthened. All right. I think this is my last example. Example number 4. This is the one that I shared at the very beginning. And again, not a great one. Here, we don't know who the source is of the message, and the hazard is a whole bunch of information all combined into one run-on with commas separating pieces of information. The location is Nampa, Idaho. It's difficult to read visually, it's difficult to understand what's being said, and it's a real challenge here. When we try to interpret it, I still run into problems, even with some good guesses. It appears to be a 19-year-old driving a 2018 gray Honda Civic with a license plate, or maybe an Idaho 2008 gray Lexus with a license plate number, last seen in Nampa, Idaho. Just not really sure. And your guess is probably as good as mine on this, but maybe you have better ideas about what is that's going on. Okay, I was wrong. I had one more example. This one has 20 abbreviations or acronyms. It's entirely in all caps. We could probably do a pretty decent job of interpreting it. I hope that you're reading along while I'm talking. It's a 48-year-old white female, 5'4", 180 pounds, a brown bob cut hair, brown eyes, long sleeve white gray sweatshirt. I start to fall apart as I'm trying to figure out what this is about. But we can see this person is particularly vulnerable because they're diabetic and insulin dependent. So they're going to need some assistance if we can't help to find them as soon as possible. They left from the address and they're walking their dog, maybe. Maybe has a black and white spotted dog with her. But we need you to notify FVPD at that phone number if you have any information. So obviously she needs assistance as quickly as possible, but this message is going to make it difficult for people to interpret what they're looking for and how to help. So when I came to the radio conference a couple of weeks ago, we had a lot of audience participation in interpreting all of those different acronyms and abbreviations, and I would have loved to have seen you working those out as I was talking them through. And I'm happy to bring them back up and we can talk about them in just a minute. But let me give you some tools that are available as you are thinking about working within your own 911 agencies, with your own call centers, or just thinking about how you might improve your own alerting practices or working with others who are responsible for alerts and warnings, because there are tools available. The first one I want to point you to is this document. It's called the Warning Lexicon. This is one of the primary documents that we created for FEMA IPAWS. It includes 48 different hazards and impact statements that go along with each hazard, and 112 protective action statements that are in plain language that go along with each of the hazards. We've tried to make them consistent in the language, making them not complex pieces of information, and kind of in building blocks so that you can copy a piece of the recommended contents into your message builder and start to build out a message that will follow the stepwise progression of the source, the hazard, the location and time, followed by guidance in each of your messages that you write. So there in this document is a structured workflow to help you to write those complete and consistent messages. And in the supplemental material is all of the contents of these 48 hazards and impact statements. It does not include missing and endangered persons. We have another document that's coming soon, nor does it include what are generally called all clear messages, which we refer to as post-alert messages. But we have another lexicon that is coming on post-alert messages shortly. The Warning Lexicon has been downloaded almost yesterday. It was 10,497 times. I didn't check today, but we know that it's being used internationally and being translated into other documents, and you can get it for free by going to that bit.ly at the bottom that's in red. The next tool I want to point you to is the FEMA IPAWS Message Design Dashboard. This tool uses the Warning Lexicon, which you can download through that bit.ly link. It uses all the data in the supplemental material as the data backbone for the dashboard. It is software that's freely available through the Assistive Tools platform on the FEMA IPAWS site. When you go to the link that's in red at the bottom, it will ask you to use multi-factor authentication to get into the Assistive Tools platform. But once you get in there, you can get into the message design dashboard and start using it immediately. IPAWS is currently staffed, but is not doing as much outreach as they used to do, as they've refocused their efforts on other things based upon the priorities of the current administration. But I know that if you reach out to them for assistance, they will continue to be helpful. And so I encourage you to go to this link to get the message design dashboard. In addition, when you use the dashboard, you can take the training on effective message writing. There is a 30-minute self-paced training on effective message writing that anyone can use. This bit.ly, which is bit.ly learn to warn, you can access it and share it with anyone. It will talk you through the theory and methods around writing an effective message, and it will also show you some example messages and how to use the dashboard to write those messages. And in addition, we have provided custom training for regions, locations, and individual organizations to address either missing persons messages or all the other kinds of hazards that are included in the warning lexicon. And that is also another option as a tool that's available in addition to all these other things that I'm sharing with you. The last thing I want to point you to is the Warn Room. This is a blog that I run, and it's also my small business. But when you go to the blog, you can read recent warning messages that have been analyzed for their effectiveness based upon the contents that we just went through. It will talk about whether or not there is a source, location, guidance, time, and protective actions, and also talk about the kind of language that's included in the message in terms of it being interpretable and understandable and useful for people who need to make a decision to take action. So you can check that out and look at the blog. And this is, again, something that I hope that people will share. And it seems that it's been very useful for practitioners thus far. So my call to action is for you as 911 call center operators to share this information that I just provided. I know that it's been recorded, and so you should be able to share it with your colleagues in Colorado and beyond. To advocate for better messaging, because the messages that people receive from wireless emergency alerts, it helps to initiate action. It also helps to increase trust in the organization that's sending them, and it demonstrates competency when they're sent in a way that the messages are useful and understandable for the receiving audience. And last, to train, to utilize the resources that I just provided to practice writing messages, to practice writing in response to different scenarios, and to develop templates before you need them. All of those documents and training materials can help you to create those messages so that when it's time to issue them, they've already been vetted and reviewed by people who are responsible for approving them, and you'll be ready to go when it's time to go. So here's my contact information. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can contact me by email, or you can also go to thewarnroom.com. This has been recorded, and I'm happy to take questions at this time and also to respond and communicate by email. So Jennifer, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and hopefully there's some interesting comments and questions.
All right, thanks, Jeanette. And I don't see any questions in chat, but as I said at the beginning, this is not normally a shy crowd. So Colorado, what kind of questions do we have for Dr. Sutton? While you guys are thinking about that, I will say that I have gone to the website and the resources that are there are just fabulous. This would be great as continuing education for your peeps. It's great for initial training for your team on how to write those messages, and it's great to have as a template so that when you're in the moment, you don't have to fumble for words. So I think we had Michael Berry first, and then Chris Stewart. Michael.
Good afternoon. Thank you, ma'am. Curious, you brought up earlier the WIA English and Spanish. If you have any recommendations, best practices, as far as tools for a translation for agencies, especially those, as you said, you were trying to send them out as quickly as possible. Best practices for translation when you maybe don't have a native speaker on staff.
I wish that I had something to tell you to do. I wish that I could tell you that Google Translate or something like that is your best bet. But I don't trust it to be accurate right now, and I haven't yet seen tools that translate specifically for emergency alerts, which is its own small subset. Maybe somebody else, maybe Steve, I think that you might have a solution because I think I've heard you talk about this before. But it's a real challenge, and all agencies are working on that. Um, Steve, do you have a solution? Because I want to let you talk before I jump onto the next question.
We use for translation Reachwell, which I believe Zubin, the owner of the company, is on this call. I thought I saw his name on there. That's what we use for translation, and it works for real time. But I don't have a great solution. Reference Michael Berry's question about the iPause side of the translation. And I actually raised my hand with I have a very similar question that I'll just tack on to his, which is, some software have the capability of what they call tokens, or kind of like a fill in the blank where you can capture part of the content that the dispatcher puts in and pass it into that translated piece of the iPause 90 and 360. And I don't want to take away from Michael's question, but I have a follow-up, which is, have you done any research? Has your group done any research on if you're inputting information into a translated message that comes from the English message that's actually in English, like a street name or something that is not translated in, automatically? Is there any research on people's understanding of the information?
There's a couple of people who are doing research on Spanish language messaging. We know that there was a group out of University of Colorado Boulder that was doing work with the state on the need for Spanish language messaging and policies around it. I don't think they've done anything with actual translation work yet. There is a researcher who has funding from the National Weather Service who's at the University of Illinois. His name is Joseph Trujillo Falcone. He's done some work about language utilized in WIAs, but I don't believe that it was about location information like you're bringing up right now. It was more about, do people understand NWS when it's translated into, instead of National Weather Service, it's I think it's SNW because it's changed to the Service of National Weather or something like that. So it's the order is changed, the acronym is different, and also the language around the hazard itself is difficult for some people to understand who are not English isn't their first language, or they come from another country and another culture. And this problem of language has been one that they've been talking about for 2 years now, 3 years now, I think, within iPause. And there's not a solution yet. And I'm not familiar with anybody who's done what you're asking about, Steve. And Michael, I don't know that there's a best place to go to for the automatic translation services yet.
And I would just tack on, I know that there are some agencies that have pre-translated some templates. obviously that doesn't address the translation for the locations and that kind of thing, but I know that Eagle County has done some work on some pre-translated templates and commonly used phrases for those alerts. And so you might reach out to other agencies and see if they have anything like that. Chris Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette, for that presentation. I've worked two hats. I help our 911 center, but my primary role is emergency manager here in Delta. Most of your focus today was on WIA and IPAWS. Does your resources provide, like our dispatchers don't do IPAWS, that falls to emergency management. Do you have just general the opt-in messaging? We use Genesis in our center to help with those messaging that's emergency notifications, but it's not quite the level of IPAWS. And do you have any best recommendations? Some of the courses I've taken in the past talk about, because there are the 90 and 360 character limits in IPAWS, of using a link, like a bit link or something in your message, so that short, sweet, and then click this link for more info, and it links to a Twitter page or some other dedicated site that everybody can get to, that they can be updated fast.
Thanks. Those are really good questions. I'm glad you bring them up. Everything that I talked about for short messaging can apply to your opt-in systems too. I know that in some cases they're limited to like 160 characters. I think that Rave just moved to 600 characters, which is a lot of information. But you can utilize these practices that I've just talked about for all of your short messaging, because people are still going to have the same processes that they go through in their heads about understanding and deciding and believing and personalizing the information. You need to answer those questions in the message that's issued. And in order to reduce the amount of time that people spend looking for additional information before acting. So that's the response to your first question. Your second question is related to the use of links. In a 90-character message, when you simply can't include very much information, it's going to send people to look for more information. That is the primary outcome. People do not automatically respond to a 90-character message by taking a protective action. They look for more information, unless they've been trained that when you receive this shake alert message, you get underneath your desk. But that's a training orientation. So including a link is going to help people to get to the right information that you want them to have. But there is a caution around that related to the overloading of systems when people go to that link. And making sure that the link has a trusted name attached to it so people know. The use of Bitly, I use Bitly on my slides because I haven't paid for an additional link generator. But including .gov is more trusted than including a general Bitly link. If you noticed, I had created actual names for those Bitlys, the warning lexicon or learn to warn, which is much better than those long strings of text and numerals that you would see in a regular Bitly. So .gov is more trusted. .org is somewhat trusted. .com less so. Social media and Bitlys are at the bottom of the list when we talk about trust. But then there's another question about whether or not people do click them. If you can include as much information as possible in your 360 character message that reduces people from needing to click on that link, it's to their benefit. When we've done experiments where we've asked people to click on the link before answering our experiment questions, and that's reminding people multiple times and making the link live when they scroll over it, they choose not to click on the link, even in an experiment. So if we're asking people to click on a link when they're getting, 10 messages a day from different places, if they can't immediately trust that that's a link that's worth clicking on and they really believe that it's a good place to go, we've lost them already. So for using all of your characters in a 360 is the first recommendation. Adding that link for additional information is useful. in a 90 character, you're kind of stuck with using a link and hoping that people use it. It's a
Thank
very
you.
long answer to your question.
Oh, that's perfectly all right. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Zach,
Hello. So I'll speak to Jennifer's point earlier where she was talking about, we do have some pre-translated messages in our Everbridge system. But the issue with that is you then have to send out multiple messages, right? So you're sending the message in English, then you're going back and resending it again in Spanish, to where we went to Reachwell. And to Steve's point, it does not translate the roads well. And then also it doesn't translate some of the information. We fortunately have a Spanish speaking emergency management deputy director, so he keeps a very close eye on it. And he always notifies when something's wrong. And just recently, like we were saying that we were searching for a party, like law enforcement was searching for a party in the area. Well, it of course translated that to like a fiesta opposed to like a person. And so there are things like that that Reachwell, they work great with us and we send them those updates so they can work on that stuff. But it is an issue that we run into pretty frequently with the translation of some of those things.
Mhm. Thank you.
thanks, Zach. Great questions, everybody. Does anybody else have any questions while we have the expert here? All right, well, I know Dr. Sutton will provide the slide deck and we will put that into our resource folder, and this will be on our YouTube account for the PUC task force. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and thank you so much, Dr. Sutton, for being here and for the work that you're doing, and we're looking forward to the information that's forthcoming that you talked about.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in today.
Yep, any final words, Dr. Sutton?
Share, train, and practice.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.